The fire crackled low in the stone hearth, casting shadows across the weathered cabin walls. Old Tom Holloway, 89 years, bearing the weight of a lifetime in these Appalachian mountains, leaned forward in his chair. His grandson, Jacob, 16 and restless with youth, looked up from his phone. "You asked about our family name," old Tom said, his voice rough as creek gravel. "Why Holloway matters in these mountains, why people still respect it after all these years." Jacob set the phone aside. Something in his grandfather's tone demanded attention. "I need to tell you about 1885, the old man continued. "About an Apache warrior who saved our family, and about the mountain woman who saved him right back." "Apache?" Jacob's eyebrows rose. "In West Virginia?" Old Tom smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "Son, sometimes the most unlikely people end up exactly where they're meant to be. Sometimes the things we save end up saving us right back." He settled deeper into his chair, and his voice took on the cadence of stories told and retold across generations. They found each other by following death. What they created together was life. The February dawn of 1885 broke cold and clear over the Monongahela forest. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, transforming the wilderness into a blanket of white, interrupted only by the dark sentinels of pine and oak. The temperature held at 8 degrees, cold enough to make breath visible, cold enough to kill the unwary. A blood trail cut through the pristine snow, fresh, still steaming in the frigid air. The man following it moved like smoke through the trees. 21 years old, lean as a wolf himself, with obsidian hair hanging past his shoulders and eyes that missed nothing. His name was Naichi, though the few whites who'd seen him and lived called him Runs with Wolves. He was Chiricahua Apache, and he was very far from home. He wore buckskin leggings and a wool shirt taken from an abandoned homestead 3 states back. His moccasins left prints so faint they'd vanish with the next wind. Everything about him spoke of a man who'd learned to move through a world that wanted him dead. The blood trail led upward through a stand of hemlock, then into a clearing surrounded by young aspens. That's where he found her. The she-wolf lay on her side in the snow. Black fur, massive, easily 90 pounds. Her breathing came shallow and rapid, each exhale producing a small cloud that dissipated immediately. 3 wounds marred her coat. Buckshot from the pattern and size. Not immediately fatal, but in this cold, with that much blood loss, death would come soon enough. Runs with Wolves knelt slowly, speaking in his native tongue. The Apache words flowed soft and rhythmic. "Mai, Sister Wolf, who did this to you?" The wolf's yellow eyes found his face. There was intelligence there, and something else, pleading. Understanding that she was dying, that her pups would die with her, still moving inside her swollen belly. He placed his hand gently on her neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath the fur. In Apache belief, wolves were sacred, teachers, guides. To find one dying like this, shot for sport or bounty, filled him with a familiar rage. The same rage he'd felt watching his brother die, watching his people herded like cattle onto land that would never be home. "I cannot leave you," he said quietly. He stood, scanning the clearing with eyes trained by a lifetime of survival. Whoever shot her might return, but he saw only trees, heard only wind, felt only the cold pressing against his skin. Decision made, he began gathering fallen branches. His hands worked quickly, efficiently, fashioning a travois from pine boughs and strips of leather he carried. He'd dragged wounded warriors this way, back when he had a people to fight for. Now,
he would drag a wolf.
He didn't know a white woman was watching him from the trees, and he didn't know that saving this wolf would save both their lives. Vera McAllister had lived alone in these mountains for 20 years. At 58, she moved through the forest with the confidence of someone who'd built her life one stone, one log, one bitter choice at a time. Her face bore the marks of weather and solitude. Her hands were strong from decades of labor. She wore men's work clothes because they were practical, and practicality had kept her alive when nothing else mattered. She'd heard the gunshots earlier, 3 evenly spaced reports from the northwest. Not hunting season. Nothing legal would account for those shots. Now she watched an Apache warrior trying to save a dying wolf, and every instinct screamed contradiction. Apache weren't supposed to be in Appalachia. Young men weren't supposed to be gentle with wounded animals. The world wasn't supposed to surprise her anymore. She stepped from the trees, rifle raised but not quite aimed. "Step away from the wolf, boy." He froze. His hand moved toward the knife at his belt, stopped, considered. His eyes found hers across 30 feet of snow and morning light. "She is dying," he said in heavily accented English. "I help." "You Apache?" Silence stretched between them. He could lie, could claim to be Cherokee, Delaware, anything but what he was. She saw the calculation in his face, saw him choose truth. "Yes." Vera studied him, really looked, saw that his hands on the wolf were gentle, not cruel, saw that he was alone, vulnerable, far from any place that would shelter him, saw that he was trying to save something instead of destroy it. "You're a long way from Arizona," she said, lowering the rifle slightly. "Long story. Wolf is dying now." She made her decision the way she'd made every important decision for 30 years. Quickly, without second-guessing, trusting the instinct that had kept her breathing when grief tried to stop her heart. "My cabin is 2 miles north. Wolf won't make it without both of us carrying. You help me save her. We talk after. Deal?" He nodded once. No hesitation. They worked together in silence. Vera's knowledge of construction combined with his Apache efficiency. The travois became sturdier, more practical. When they lifted the wolf onto it, she whimpered but didn't fight. Some part of her understood these humans meant help, not harm. Runs with wolves began chanting softly as they moved. Apache prayers for wounded animals, for safe passage, for strength. The words were foreign to Vera, but she recognized prayer when she heard it. Pain seeking comfort from something larger than itself. The journey took an hour. The wolf was heavy. The snow was deep. Neither of them spoke except for brief directions. "Left around this boulder. Careful on that ice. Watch the drop." Vera's cabin appeared through the trees like something grown from the mountain itself. 12 feet by 16, built from logs she'd cut and notched with her own hands. Smoke rose from the chimney. The roof didn't leak. The door hung straight. "Inside," she said. "Quick!" They carried the wolf through the door into warmth and lamplight. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee and 30 years of solitary living. Vera gestured toward the hearth. "Lay her by the fire. I've got medical supplies." He set the travois down carefully. The wolf's breathing had become more labored during the journey. Time was running short. "You know animal medicine?" Vera asked, already pulling a wooden box from beneath her bed. "Apache learned from nature. Different than white medicine." "Show me." From a small pouch at his belt, he produced dried herbs. Vera recognized yarrow immediately. Used it herself for wounds. The other plants she didn't know, but she could guess their properties from context. Yarrow for bleeding, he said. Sage for infection. Vera felt something shift in her chest. Common ground. Shared knowledge. Two different peoples arriving at the same truths through different paths. I use yarrow too, she said quietly. Mountain medicine. As they worked over the wolf, Vera noticed the old wound on his shoulder. Poorly healed, edges inflamed. You're hurt too. Old, not important. Infected is important. Sit. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Apache pride was legendary, even among people who'd never met one. But he sat, and she cleaned the wound with hands that had learned gentleness again only in the last hour. They worked like that for 20 minutes. She held pressure on the wolf's worst wound while he prepared a poultice for his shoulder. He kept the fire stoked while she stitched torn flesh. Neither was helpless. Neither was useless. Partners in the work of healing. When the worst bleeding had stopped, when the wolf's breathing had steadied slightly, Vera stood and moved to the stove. Coffee? He looked at her with suspicion, earned through a lifetime of broken promises. Why you help Apache? Vera almost smiled. Almost. Why you help wolf shot by white men? For the first time, something that might have been humor touched his face. We're both fools, apparently. Coffee or not? He nodded. She poured 2 tin cups, handed him one. He sipped, grimaced. Very strong. That's how mountain folk like it. Keeps you awake when you're hauling dying animals through blizzards. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. The silence of two people who'd learned that words often meant less than actions. You got a name besides Apache Boy? Vera asked finally. Nietzsche. Runs with wolves in your language. Vera. Vera McAllister. Lived here 30 years. Alone, mostly. Why alone? Her face hardened slightly. Walls she'd built over decades didn't come down with one question. Long story. Like yours, I imagine. He studied her over the rim of his cup, seeing past the gruff exterior to the pain beneath. Apache warriors learned to read people the way trackers read trails. Survival depended on it. You saved Wolf, he said quietly. You're a good woman. You tried to save her first. You're not the savage the army says. The word hung between them. Savage. How many times had he heard it? How many times had it preceded violence? But from her, in this moment, it felt different. An acknowledgement that she'd been taught lies and was beginning to see truth. The wolf stirred near the fire. Her breathing changed, became labored again. Vera crossed to her quickly, knelt, placed a hand on the distended belly. She's going into shock, blood loss too great. Runs with wolves touched the belly gently, feeling. Pups. Still alive inside. I feel movement. If she dies, they die. Vera's mind raced through options. She'd worked for the wildlife department once, a lifetime ago. Had performed field surgeries on injured animals. Knew that transfusion was possible if you had a donor, if you had the skill, if you had luck. I worked for wildlife department, she said, speaking more to herself than to him. Performed field surgeries. We can transfuse blood if we had donor. From another wolf? Or dog, large enough. But there's no dogs here. She stopped. Thought. Remembered. Wait, Tom Holloway, young miner, lives 5 miles down mountain, has hunting dogs, big ones. Runs with wolves started to rise. I go. No, Vera's voice was sharp. White people see Apache, they shoot first. I'll go. You stay with Wolf. Keep her warm. Talk to her. Talk? Animals understand tone. Comfort her. She grabbed her coat, her rifle, moved toward the door with the speed of decision. If I'm not back in 2 hours, take Wolf and run. Cavalry might follow me. He looked at her steadily. Where I run? All America hunts Apache. Vera's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then I better hurry back. The door closed behind her. Runs with Wolves was alone with the dying wolf and 30 years of another person's carefully constructed solitude. He knelt beside the wolf, placed his hand on her head, began singing in Apache. Not a death song, though he knew those well. A song of strength, of endurance, of mothers fighting for their children. Sister Wolf, he sang softly, you are strong. Your children wait to see this world. Fight. I fight with you. The wolf's yellow eyes opened, found his face. Her labored breathing calmed slightly, as if his voice alone could anchor her to life. Outside, wind moved through the pines. Somewhere distant, a raven called. The mountain held its breath, waiting to see if mercy would be enough. Vera moved through the forest like water finding its path. 5 miles was nothing. She'd walked farther on worse days. But every minute counted now. The wolf was dying, the pups were dying, and for reasons she couldn't quite name, failure felt like it would break something in her she'd thought was already broken beyond repair. Tom Holloway's cabin appeared through the trees, smaller than hers, newer. Smoke rose from the chimney. She could hear the dogs before she saw them. 3 big hunting hounds in a pen beside the cabin. She knocked hard on the door. Tom opened it, and his face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, concern, confusion. Vera McAllister hadn't come down from her mountain in 2 years. Miss Vera? That really you? What's wrong? Need your dog. Big one. Emergency. What kind of emergency requires my dog at dawn? Transfusion. Wolf surgery. Don't have time to explain. Tom's mother, Sarah, appeared behind him, wiping her hands on an apron. 60 years old, face lined with work and worry, eyes sharp as winter stars. Vera McAllister, Sarah said, slowly. 30 years you've been up that mountain. Now you come down asking favors. It's important. Sarah studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Tom, give her the dog. Any woman who comes down after 30 years has good reason. Tom moved to comply, but stopped. Miss Vera, you should know. Harding's men been asking about you. About whether you own that land. Whether you might be a problem. Vera's jaw tightened. What did you tell them? That you're a harmless hermit. But Miss Vera, they're planning wolf hunt. Big one. Tomorrow dawn. 50 men. They're talking about clearing the whole territory. The words hit like bullets. 50 men. Tomorrow. Everything suddenly made sense. The systematic shooting, the trail cameras she'd found last month. This wasn't random hunting. This was extermination. Then we've got less time than I thought, she said. Dog, now. Tom brought out Sam, a massive hound with gentle eyes and a coat like burnished copper. The dog followed Vera without complaint, sensing urgency if not understanding it. The return journey was faster. Vera moved with purpose now, the dog trotting beside her. Her mind raced through calculations. Save this wolf. Expose Harding's operation. Protect what remained of the wild. Maybe, finally, do something that mattered. Maybe stop running from everything she'd failed. She burst through the cabin door to find Runs with Wolves exactly where she'd left him, still singing, still keeping vigil. The wolf's breathing was worse. Tom had followed her. Now he stood in the doorway and froze. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph! That's an Apache! Runs with Wolves' hand moved to his knife. Tom's hand moved to his belt, though he'd left his gun outside. "Both of you shut up," Vera snapped. "Wolf first, introductions later." She laid out the supplies with practiced efficiency. Tubing, needles, antiseptic. Everything she'd kept from her old life, maintained out of habit more than hope. "Sam, here boy." The dog came willingly. Vera had delivered his mother's pups 7 years ago. He trusted her. The transfusion took precision and luck in equal measure. Vera knew the biology. Runs with Wolves knew the spiritual medicine. Tom provided muscle and steady hands. Between the three of them, between science and prayer and simple determination, they drew blood from the dog and gave it to the wolf. The wolf's breathing steadied. Color returned to her gums. Her eyes opened and focused with something approaching awareness. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom whispered. "She is now blood sister to dog," Runs with Wolves said. "In Apache, we call this sacred bond." They sat back, all three of them, exhausted. The wolf was alive. The pups were alive. Small victory in a world that offered few. Tom looked between Vera and the Apache warrior, between the impossible situation and the even more impossible alliance forming in this cabin. "So we saving one wolf," he said finally. "Harding's planning to kill all of them. What's the point?" Vera met his eyes. Something in her face had changed in the last hours. Some wall had cracked. "Point is, we can save something," she said. "Even if it's just one life. Even if it's just today." Runs with Wolves spoke quietly. "One life can change many." Tom looked at the wolf, at the strange trio gathered around her, at the future coming at them like a freight train. "Y'all are crazy," he said, "but I'm in. What do we do?" Vera stood, moved to the window. Dawn was breaking properly now, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful, indifferent. The mountain didn't care who lived or died on its slopes. But she cared. For the first time in 30 years, she cared enough to fight. "We document what Harding's doing," she said. "Build evidence. Stop him the legal way. And if legal doesn't work?" She turned back to face them. In her eyes was something Tom would remember for the rest of his life. Not hope exactly. Something harder. Something earned through decades of loss and isolation. "Then we make it work," Vera said. Outside, wind moved through the pines. Inside, a wolf breathed steady by the fire. And 3 unlikely allies began planning how to fight money and power with nothing but truth and stubbornness. They didn't know it yet, but the battle for the mountain had already begun. And the mountain, as always, would remember who stood for it when standing cost everything. Night fell on the mountain like a curtain dropped across a stage. The cabin held 5 souls now instead of 1. Vera moved between the wolf and the men with an efficiency born of solitude finally broken. Tom had stayed, claiming his mother knew where he was, claiming he wanted to help. The truth was simpler. He wanted to be part of something that mattered. Runs with Wolves sat cross-legged near the fire, cleaning his knife with methodical precision. The blade caught firelight, throwing brief stars across the log walls. He'd said little since the transfusion, watching instead, measuring these white people against a lifetime of betrayal. The wolf, Shadow, as Vera had begun calling her, slept deeply for the first time. Her flanks rose and fell with steady breath. The pups inside her moved occasionally, small tremors of life, refusing to surrender. "Tell me about the trail cameras," Vera said, breaking the silence. Tom looked up from the coffee she'd poured him. "Started appearing about 6 months back. Maybe a dozen of them scattered through the territory. Brennan checks them weekly. Harding's paying him good money to map every wolf den, every game trail, every movement pattern." "They're hunting with intelligence," Vera said. "That's what makes this different from random killing. There is honor in hunting," Runs with Wolves said quietly. "Take what you need. Thank the animal's spirit. Use all the meat, all the hide. This is not hunting. This is murder." The word hung in the air. Murder, as if animals could be murdered like people. But looking at Shadow sleeping by the fire, looking at the care these three had taken to save her, the word felt right. "We need those camera records," Vera said. "Proof of systematic elimination. Proof Harding's lying to the federal government about wildlife numbers." "Cameras are checked tomorrow morning," Tom offered. "Brennan does it himself, early, before first light." Vera's eyes met Runs with Wolves across the fire. A question passed between them without words. The Apache warrior nodded once. "Then we take them tonight," Vera said. They moved through the forest like ghosts given purpose. Vera led, knowing every stone and stream from 30 years of walking these ridges. Tom followed, young and strong, but loud compared to the others. Runs with Wolves came last, moving with a silence that made Tom understand why his people had terrified the cavalry for so long. The first camera hung in a white oak, positioned to overlook a game trail. Runs with Wolves scaled the tree with the ease of someone raised in the mountains, though his mountains lay 1,000 miles southwest. He retrieved the camera, descended, handed it to Vera without a word. The second camera took longer to find. It was hidden better, positioned in a hemlock grove where deer came to shelter from snow. Vera climbed this one herself, her 58 years showing in the careful placement of each foothold, but not in her determination. They were approaching the third location when Tom grabbed Vera's arm. She froze, listened. Voices drifted through the trees. Male. 2 of them, close enough to be dangerous. Runs with Wolves moved his hand in a gesture Vera somehow understood. Down, still. Silent. They dropped behind a fallen log, pressing themselves into the snow. The voices grew louder. "Brennan's getting paranoid," one man said. "Checking the cameras at night now, too. Can you blame him? Harding's riding him hard about this hunt. Wants every wolf accounted for before dawn." 50 men for a few dogs. Seems like overkill. Not dogs, wolves. And Harding's got his reasons. You heard about his old man. The voices passed within 10 feet of their hiding place. Vera felt Tom's heart hammering against the log, felt her own pulse loud in her ears. But Runs with Wolves barely seemed to breathe, still as stone, patient as death. When the voices faded, when the forest returned to wind and silence, Vera made a sound. A bird call, soft and natural. A mountain thrush settling for the night. The Apache's eyes found hers in the darkness. Approval passed between them. She was learning. The third camera was different, newer, better concealed. And when Runs with Wolves studied the area, his face went hard. "This one watches your cabin," he said to Vera. "Not game trail, your home." The implication settled like ice in her stomach. They weren't just hunting wolves. They were watching her, studying her, waiting to see if she'd become a problem. "How long?" she asked. He examined the camera's placement, the wear on the straps. 2 weeks, maybe 3. They'd been watching her while she lived alone, unaware, while she fetched water and split wood and convinced herself that isolation meant safety. The violation of it made her hands shake. "Now you know how Apache feel," Runs with Wolves said quietly. "Always watched, always hunted, even when you think you are alone." Vera met his eyes, saw in them the accumulated weight of a people who'd been prey for generations, saw her own anger reflected and multiplied 100-fold. "Take the camera," she said. "Take them all." They returned to the cabin with 3 cameras and a new understanding of what they faced. This wasn't just about wolves. It was about control. About powerful men deciding who had the right to exist in wild places. Inside, by lamplight, they examined the cameras. Modern devices, expensive. The kind of equipment that spoke of serious money and serious intent. "Can't look at the photographs until we get them developed," Tom said. "Would need to go to town for that." "No," Runs with Wolves said. "If we go to town, we tell Harding we have cameras. Better he does not know until we are ready." Vera nodded. The Apache was right. They had one advantage now. Harding didn't know they were coming. "Then we wait," she said. "Document what we can. And tomorrow, when the hunt starts, we see how bold these men are when someone's watching back." They were settling in for the night when footsteps sounded on the porch. Not furtive, bold. A knock at the door that expected to be answered. Vera moved toward it, but Runs with Wolves was faster. He positioned himself beside the door, knife in hand, invisible to whoever stood outside. She opened it to find Cole Brennan filling the doorway. He was a big man, 42 years old, and hard as the mountains that raised him. Former cavalry, 10 years fighting Apache in Arizona before Geronimo's surrender. His eyes held the particular weariness of someone who'd done terrible things for what he believed were right reasons. "Evening, Miss McAllister," he said. His voice was measured, calm, the voice of a man in control. "Nice night for thieving, isn't it?" He stepped inside without invitation, and Vera saw Runs with Wolves tense in the shadows. But Brennan's hands remained visible, empty of weapons. This wasn't an attack. This was something else. From his coat, Brennan pulled a photograph, held it up to the lamplight. The image showed Runs with Wolves clearly, taken 3 days prior, moving through the forest with the unconscious grace of his people. "Apache," Brennan said, "unless I miss my guess. Thought we caught all of Geronimo's runners after the surrender. Must have missed one." Tom stood slowly from his chair. Runs with Wolves emerged from the shadows, knife low and ready. Vera stepped between all 3 men, like a dam trying to hold back a flood. "What do you want, Brennan?" He looked at her with something that might have been respect, if it wasn't wrapped in such weariness. "Mr. Harding sent me with an offer. $5,000 for your land claim. That's more than fair for national forest you don't own anyway." "I don't have a land claim. This is public land." "Exactly, which means you're squatting. And Harding's negotiating a land exchange with the federal government. Once that goes through, this cabin sits on his property." The words were delivered without malice, just facts. The grinding machinery of law and money crushing everything in its path. "And the Apache?" Vera asked. Brennan's eyes found Runs with Wolves in the shadows. 2 warriors from opposite sides of a finished war, measuring each other across a cabin that smelled of coffee and wood smoke and wolf. "There's a reward for escaped reservation Indians. $200. Could turn 'em in right now." "Try," Runs with Wolves said. His English was simple, but the threat was eloquent. "I fought Chiricahua for 10 years, Brennan said. "Respect the hell out of them. Best light cavalry the world ever saw. But the war's over. Your people lost. Time to accept that." "And wolves?" Vera asked. "They lose too?" Brennan turned back to her. "Mr. Harding believes wolves represent the old way. Dangerous, unpredictable, bad for development, bad for progress. Federal policy supports removal of predators from areas designated for settlement." "Settlement," Vera repeated. "That's what he calls it, taking public land and turning it into private profit. That's civilization, Miss McAllister, like it or not." He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Outside, night pressed against the windows. Inside, 3 people who shouldn't trust each other were learning they had no choice. "I'm giving you what I was ordered not to give," Brennan said. "A warning. A chance. Run tonight. Take your Apache friend. Take whatever you value. Disappear before dawn." "Why?" Tom asked. "Why warn us if you work for Harding?" Brennan's face showed nothing, but something in his eyes, some old pain, flickered briefly. "Because I fought Apaches who were just protecting their families, shot wolves who were just feeding their pups, did my duty and slept poorly for it. I'm too old to keep adding ghosts to my sleep." He stepped into the darkness, then turned back one last time. "But understand this. Come dawn, if you're still here, if you interfere with the hunt, I'll do my job. No mercy, no hesitation. Duty first." The door closed behind him. Silence filled the cabin like water filling a well. Deep, cold, absolute. "He could have killed me," Runs with Wolves said finally. "Many times in war, men like him tried. Why does he warn instead?" "Because he's tired," Vera said. She understood that weariness, had lived with it for 30 years. Tired of being the weapon someone else points at targets they choose. "So what do we do?" Tom asked. "Run like he said?" Vera moved to the window, looked out at mountains that had sheltered her for 3 decades. Mountains that asked nothing except that she respect them. Mountains that were about to be carved up and sold to the highest bidder. 30 years I've been running," she said quietly. "From responsibility, from pain, from my own daughter. Every year I told myself next year I'd go back. Next year I'd face what I'd left behind. Next year I'd stop being a coward." She turned to face them. Shadow stirred by the fire. Pups moving in her belly. Life insisting on its right to continue. "I'm done running," Vera said. Runs with Wolves stood, moved to stand beside her at the window. 2 people who'd spent their lives fleeing, choosing finally to stand. "My people ran for generations," he said. "From Spanish, from Mexicans, from Americans. Always running, always hunted. Last fight, my brother died in my arms. I ran, left his body for coyotes because I was afraid." His voice carried the weight of shame earned and carried across 1,000 miles. "I am tired of running too." Tom looked between them, young enough to still believe courage was something you either had or didn't. Old enough to recognize it when people chose it despite their fear. "My father died in those mines," he said, "underground, crushed when the roof came down because the owners wouldn't pay for proper shoring. I've been going into that same mine every day since, terrified I'll die the same way. But I go because my family needs the money." He stood, joined them. "If you 2 can stop running, I guess I can too. What's the plan?" Vera's mind worked through options. They couldn't fight 50 armed men, couldn't win a straight confrontation. But they could expose what Harding was doing, could make the truth loud enough that money and influence couldn't silence it. "We document everything," she said. "Tomorrow when the hunt starts, we follow. We photograph every kill, every illegal act, every moment of systematic extermination. Then we send it to every newspaper, every wildlife office, every federal agency that might care." "And if they don't care?" Tom asked. "Then at least we'll have tried," Vera said. "At least we'll know we stood for something when standing mattered." Runs with Wolves placed his hand on Shadow's head. The wolf opened her yellow eyes, looked at him with that eerie intelligence animals sometimes showed. "Sister Wolf," he said in Apache, "we fight for you, for your pups, for the right of wild things to stay wild." They spent the rest of the night preparing. Tom would go home before dawn, gather his camera, return. Runs with Wolves would scout the hunt's staging area, learn their patterns, find the best vantage points. Vera would stay with Shadow, keeping her safe, keeping her hidden. As the others prepared to leave, Vera stopped Tom at the door. "Your mother. She should know you might not come back." "She knows," Tom said. "She was married to a miner. She's been preparing for me not coming back since I was old enough to hold a pickaxe." After they left, Vera sat alone with Shadow by the dying fire. The wolf's breathing was steady now, strong. The pups inside her moved with increasing vigor, eager for a world they hadn't seen yet. "I had a daughter once," Vera said to the sleeping wolf. "Emma. Left her when she was 5. Told myself it was temporary. Told myself I'd go back when I was stronger, when I'd healed from losing her father." She stroked Shadow's fur. The wolf's ear twitched, but she didn't wake. 20 years I've been telling myself that lie. 30 years she's been growing up without me. She's 35 now, probably has children of her own, probably hates me." The fire crackled. Wind moved through the pines outside. The mountain held no judgment, only the patient witness of stone and wood. "You're a mother too," Vera continued. "Those pups inside you, they need you. They need you to survive, to teach them, to show them how to live in a world that wants them dead." She leaned back against the wall, exhausted suddenly, with a weariness that went deeper than muscle and bone. "I won't fail you like I failed her. Whatever it takes, however this ends, you and your pups will have a chance." Shadow's breathing continued, steady and sure. Outside, the temperature dropped toward 0. Inside, a woman who'd spent 3 decades avoiding promises made one she had no idea if she could keep. But she meant it. For the first time since her husband died, since her world collapsed, since she chose flight over fight, Vera McAllister meant every word. Dawn would bring guns and men and violence masquerading as progress. Dawn would bring choices that couldn't be unmade and consequences that couldn't be avoided. But tonight, in this cabin, a wolf slept healing, and a woman sat vigil. And somewhere in the darkness, an Apache warrior moved like smoke through trees, scouting the enemy, learning their positions, preparing for the battle that would decide whether wild things had any right to the wild. The mountain remembered all of this. The mountain always remembered. Stone and root and ancient patience. Watching humans struggle with questions that trees had answered long ago. Some things were worth protecting. Some battles chose you instead of the other way around. Some moments demanded you stop running and stand, even when standing felt like inviting destruction. Vera fed the fire, checked Shadow's bandages, loaded her rifle with hands that no longer shook. Whatever came with the dawn, she would face it, not because she was brave, but because she was finally, after 30 years of hiding, too tired to keep being afraid. And sometimes, the mountain whispered in the language of wind and pine, that was enough. Sometimes exhaustion with cowardice looked exactly like courage, and the difference didn't matter nearly as much as the choice to stand. Dawn broke like a wound across the eastern sky, red and gold bleeding into winter blue, the kind of morning that promised clarity and delivered consequences. Vera stood on her porch, rifle across her arms, watching the forest wake to what might be its last day of wildness. Tom arrived first, moving through the trees with his camera slung across his chest like armor. His face carried the particular exhaustion of a man who'd told his mother goodbye, not knowing if he'd return. Behind him, silent as thought, came Runs with Wolves. The Apache had been gone all night, scouting, learning the enemy's patterns the way his grandfathers had learned cavalry movements before Little Bighorn, before Geronimo, before the long defeat. "They're staging at the meadow," Runs with Wolves said without preamble. 50 men, more guns than that. Harding brought hunters from 3 counties. "When do they move?" Vera asked. 1 hour, maybe less. They will drive wolves north toward the high ridges, then south into kill zone. Tom spread a rough map on the porch railing. "If we get to Blackstone Ridge before them, we can photograph the whole thing. High ground, clear sight lines." "And when they see us?" Vera asked. "Then we run like hell," Tom said, "but at least we'll have the pictures." Inside the cabin, Shadow had woken. She stood on shaky legs, testing her strength, her eyes bright with an intelligence that seemed to understand more than an animal should. When Vera entered, the wolf moved to her, pressed her massive head against Vera's leg in a gesture that transcended species. "Your pups will come soon," Vera told her quietly. "Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. You need to stay hidden, stay safe." The wolf looked at her. Something passed between them. Understanding. Trust. A promise neither could speak, but both felt. Vera fed her dried venison and fresh water, checked her bandages one last time. Then she did something she hadn't done in 30 years. She closed her eyes and prayed. Not to any specific god, but to whatever force governed the turning of seasons and the persistence of life against all odds. "Keep her safe," she whispered. "Whatever happens to me, keep her and her pups safe." They moved through the forest in single file, Runs with Wolves leading, reading the land like scripture written in pine and stone. Tom in the middle, camera ready, young legs keeping pace with older determination. Vera bringing up the rear, rifle loaded, eyes scanning for threats that might come from any direction. The morning air carried sounds, distant voices, the mechanical click of rifles being checked, men preparing for what they called sport, and what the mountain knew as murder dressed in Sunday clothes. Blackstone Ridge rose like a fist from the forest floor. Ancient stone thrust up by forces older than human memory, older than the wolves that hunted here, older than anything except the patient earth itself. They climbed quickly, quietly, reaching the summit just as the first line of hunters emerged into view below. 50 men spread across the valley like a net designed to catch anything with 4 legs and wild blood. Harding rode in the center on a chestnut mare, directing positions with the authority of someone who believed money gave him dominion over living things. Tom raised his camera, started shooting. Each click of the shutter a small act of rebellion against the inevitable. The hunt began with whistles and shouts, men moving in coordinated lines, driving everything before them. Deer broke from cover first, bounding north in white-tailed panic. Then elk, their massive bodies crashing through undergrowth. Then smaller things, rabbits, fox, Everything that could run, running. The wolves came last. A pack of 6 adults, 4 pups barely old enough to travel. They moved as a unit, understanding instinctively that separation meant death. The alpha male led, a massive gray with scars across his muzzle that spoke of battles won and territory held. His mate flanked the pups, keeping them together, keeping them moving. They were heading directly toward the kill zone. Vera saw it before the others, saw the funnel the hunters had created, saw how every escape route had been blocked except one, saw how that one path led to a meadow ringed with rifles and men eager to prove their dominance over creation. "They're herding them to slaughter," she said. Tom's camera kept clicking. Evidence, proof, the systematic elimination of a species for profit and pride. "We have to do something," Tom said. "Like what?" Vera asked. "We're 3 people against 50. We can document this. We can make sure the world knows, but we can't stop it." Runs with Wolves stood silent, watching the wolves run toward their death. His face showed nothing, but Vera saw his hands tighten on his rifle, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, saw in him the accumulated rage of every hunted thing that ever lived. "In Apache belief," he said quietly, "wolves are sacred, teachers, guides. To kill them without need, without honor, is to damn yourself." "These men don't believe in damnation," Vera said. "Only profit." "Then we teach them different." He moved before either could stop him. Down the ridge at a run, moving with the fluid speed that made Apache warriors legendary. By the time Vera and Tom realized his intent, he was already 50 yards down, already committed to a course that could only end one way. "Damn it," Vera hissed. She looked at Tom. "Stay here. Keep shooting. No matter what happens, get these pictures to someone who gives a damn." "Miss Vera, you can't." But she was already moving, following the Apache down the slope, rifle in hand, 30 years of isolation falling away like a snake shedding skin she no longer needed. Runs with Wolves reached the valley floor and released a sound that froze every hunter in place. An Apache war cry, ancient and terrible, the sound of a people who'd fought the Spanish, the Mexicans, the Americans, and refused to die quiet. The wolves stopped running, turned, saw him. The alpha male's eyes met the Apache's across 50 yards of snow and morning light. Recognition passed between them. Predator to predator, survivor to survivor. Those who refused to be tamed, acknowledging each other in a world that wanted them both extinct. Runs with Wolves pointed north, toward the federal wilderness boundary, toward safety. "Run!" he shouted in Apache. "Sister wolves, run free!" Whether they understood his words or simply recognized a fellow hunted thing offering help, the pack turned. The alpha led them north, away from the kill zone, toward territory where federal law protected what remained of the wild. The hunters recovered from their shock. Rifles swung toward the Apache, toward the wolves, toward anything that represented defiance of their perfectly planned massacre. Harding's voice cut through the confusion like a blade through silk. "That's an Apache. There's a reward for Apaches. $50 alive, 25 dead. I'm not particular which." 20 rifles aimed at a single target. A young man whose only crime was offering mercy to creatures that couldn't offer it to themselves. Vera stepped from the tree line, rifle raised, voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades learning that fear was just another name for being alive. "First man shoots, I drop him where he stands." Every head turned. Harding's face cycled through surprise, anger, calculation. He'd underestimated her, thought her a harmless hermit, an obstacle that could be bought or frightened into compliance. "Miss McAllister," he said with forced civility, "you're interfering with legal wildlife management." "Legal," she repeated. "You're on national forest land, driving protected species toward a kill zone, with hunters who have no permits and weapons that violate federal ordinances. Which part of that sounds legal to you?" "The part where I have friends in the federal government who've already approved this operation." "Then I guess we'll see how many friends you have when photographs of this reach every newspaper between here and Washington." Tom emerged from the ridge, camera held high. "Got it all," he called down. "Every illegal moment, every violation, all documented." The situation balanced on a knife edge. 50 armed men facing 3 people with evidence that could destroy reputations and end careers. The smart play was to back down. The safe play was to retreat. Harding made a different choice. "Take them," he said quietly. "All 3. We'll decide what to do with them after the hunt." Brennan stepped forward, and Vera saw conflict war across his weathered face. He'd warned them, given them a chance to run, but they'd chosen to stand, and now duty demanded he do his job. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Put down your weapons." "No," Runs with Wolves said simply. "Then I'll have to take them." The Apache smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You can try." What happened next happened fast. Runs with Wolves moved like water finding its level, flowing around Brennan's lunge, using the bigger man's momentum against him. They went down in a tangle of limbs and snow and violent intent. 3 hunters started toward Vera. She put a warning shot into the ground at their feet. "Next one goes center mass. Test me if you want." Tom stood frozen on the ridge, camera forgotten, watching the world collapse into chaos. And then new voices cut through the confusion. Voices coming from the north, from the east, from the south. Voices carrying accents that spoke of Appalachian roots going back generations. From the forest emerged people, not soldiers, not officials, just people. Miners who'd lost jobs to Harding's land purchases. Farmers who'd watched their grazing rights disappear. Women who'd seen their communal herb-gathering grounds fenced off and sold. Children who'd been told the streams they'd fished since birth were now private property, requiring access fees. They came armed with hunting rifles and old shotguns, and the quiet determination of people who'd been pushed too far for too long. At their head walked an old Cherokee man, 70 years if he was a day, face carved by weather and wisdom into something approaching living sculpture. "Mr. Harding," the old man said, his voice carrying authority that needed no volume. "I am Red Skywalker. I speak for the Cherokee who lived here before your grandfather's grandfathers were born. These mountains are sacred. The wolves are sacred. What you do here dishonors the earth." "This is federal land," Harding said. "I have every legal right." "You have paper," Red Skywalker interrupted. "We have bones buried in this soil going back 1,000 years. Which claim carries more weight?" More people emerged. 30, 40, 50. Enough to match Harding's hunters. Enough to make violence a mutual loss instead of one-sided victory. Sarah Holloway, Tom's mother, stepped forward with a group of mining widows. Women who'd buried husbands and sons to Harding's cost-cutting measures. Women who'd learned that survival sometimes required standing when standing seemed impossible. "My husband died in your mine," Sarah said. "My son nearly died there last month when supports you refused to replace finally gave way. You take and call it progress. Today, the taking stops." Harding looked around at faces hardened by loss and sharpened by necessity, saw that his carefully planned hunt had become something else entirely. A reckoning. A line drawn in Appalachian snow by people who'd decided enough was finally enough. "You're all trespassing," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Then arrest us all," Vera said. "Arrest every person here. See how that plays in the newspapers. See how your federal friends react when they realize you're not managing wildlife. You're fighting a war against your own community." Brennan had released Runs with Wolves and stepped back. His hand remained on his pistol, but he wasn't drawing, wasn't moving. His eyes scanned the assembled crowd, making calculations no amount of training could resolve. "Mr. Harding," he said quietly, "I think we should withdraw. I'm not backing down to a mob." "It's not a mob. It's the people whose land you're trying to steal. There's a difference." From the north came a new sound. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving fast. Into the clearing rode 5 men in uniform. Federal uniforms. U.S. Marshals with badges that caught morning sun and threw it back as authority that even Harding's money couldn't buy. The lead marshal, a man in his 50s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by wealth, dismounted and surveyed the scene with professional detachment. "Garrett Harding?" he asked. "I am." "Marshal James Webster. I have a warrant for your arrest. Federal charges including conspiracy to defraud the government, operating an illegal bounty program, and attempted monopolization of public resources." The words fell like hammers on anvils. Final. Irreversible. "This is absurd," Harding said. "I have documentation, permits, federal approval." "You have fraudulent documents," Webster corrected. "We've been investigating your operation for 3 months. Dr. Marcus Riley of the Appalachian Wildlife Alliance provided us with evidence of systematic wolf extermination in areas you claimed were predator-free. Discrepancies between your reports and actual wildlife surveys. Financial records showing bounty payments disguised as consulting fees." He pulled papers from his coat. Official documents bearing federal seals. "You lied to secure land exchanges, profited from illegal hunting, and corrupted federal wildlife management for personal gain. That's a decade in prison if the judge is feeling merciful." Vera's mind reeled. Marcus, her old colleague from 30 years ago. He'd received her letter, had believed her, had acted. Webster's eyes found her in the crowd. "You must be Vera McAllister. Dr. Riley sends his regards. Says to tell you it's never too late to finish what you started." The marshals moved through Harding's hunters, collecting weapons, taking names, making it clear that the hunt was over in ways that went far beyond today's failed massacre. Brennan stood apart, watching his employer being manacled with an expression that might have been relief under different circumstances. "Mr. Brennan," Webster said, "we'd like your testimony. Cooperation might reduce your sentence significantly." Brennan looked at Harding, at the community that had stood against them, at Runs with Wolves, who'd fought him to a standstill despite giving up 40 pounds and 20 years. "I'll testify," he said. "I'll tell you everything. Names, dates, payments, all of it." "Why?" Harding demanded. "I gave you everything. Money, position, purpose." "You gave me orders to do things that kept me awake at night," Brennan said. "I'm done taking orders from men who think money means they can destroy whatever they want." As the marshals led Harding away, Webster approached Vera. "We'll need your testimony as well, and your evidence." Tom stepped forward, camera held like an offering. "Got it all right here, sir. Every moment." Webster took the camera carefully. "This will help. Thank you." The crowd began dispersing. Crisis averted. Battle won, at least for today. But Vera stood frozen, trying to process what had happened. She'd spent 30 years hiding from consequences. Now consequences had arrived, wearing federal badges and speaking in her favor. Red Skywalker approached with the careful dignity of age, recognizing age. "The mountain remembers those who stand for it," he said. "You did well today, daughter of the hills." "I'm not Cherokee," Vera said. "No, but you're Appalachian. That's tribe enough." He moved away, leaving her with Runs with Wolves and Tom, and the crystalline morning that had somehow not ended in bloodshed. "The wolves," Vera said suddenly. "Did they make it?" Runs with Wolves smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Crossed the boundary, federal wilderness. They are safe." "Today," Vera said. "They're safe today." "Today is all any of us get," the Apache replied. "Tomorrow we fight again if we must. But today we won." They walked back toward the cabin in silence. The mountain around them seemed lighter somehow, as if the land itself had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. Shadow was waiting when they arrived, and she wasn't alone. 4 pups, born while the battle raged, wet and squirming and alive, despite everything the world had thrown at their mother. Shadow's amber gaze meeting Vera's with something approaching pride. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom whispered. "Life just keeps insisting, doesn't it?" Vera knelt beside the wolf, beside the new lives that had chosen today of all days, to enter a world that wanted them dead. She felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she'd maintained for 3 decades finally collapsing under the weight of persistent hope. She was crying. Didn't realize it until tears dripped onto her hands. Crying for the pups, for Shadow, for Tom and his dead father, for Runs with Wolves and his lost people, for her daughter Emma, who she'd abandoned because fear felt safer than love. "I need to go see her," Vera said. "My daughter. I need to try." "She might not forgive you," Tom said gently. "I know, but I need to try anyway. Need to stop running from the hardest thing I ever did." Runs with Wolves placed his hand on her shoulder. "In Apache we say, the longest journey begins with fear, ends with honor. You have made the first step. The rest will come." Old Tom's voice returned, pulling Jacob back to the present. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. The night beyond the windows was deep and still. "Did she go?" Jacob asked. "Did she see her daughter?" "She did," old Tom said. 6 months later. It was hard. Emma was angry, had every right to be. But they talked, started small, letters at first, then visits. It took years, but they found their way back to each other. And the Apache warrior? Runs with Wolves stayed in these mountains, married into the Cherokee, had children, grandchildren. One of his granddaughters married my uncle. That's how Apache blood came into our family. Jacob tried to process this. "So we're part Apache?" "Part Cherokee, part Apache, part Scots-Irish, part everything that makes these mountains what they are. And we protect this land because of what happened that day. Because 3 people decided standing was better than running." "What happened to Shadow and her pups?" Old Tom smiled. "They thrived. Federal protection held. Those 4 pups grew up and had pups of their own. 30 years later, when Vera died, there were 6 wolf packs in these mountains, all descended from Shadow, all alive, because one hermit woman decided mercy mattered more than safety." He stood slowly, joints protesting decades of mountain living. Moved to the window. Outside, the Appalachian night held mysteries that cities would never understand. Remember this, Jacob. What we choose to protect ends up protecting us right back. Vera saved those wolves, and in saving them, she saved herself, found her way back to her daughter, found purpose she thought she'd lost forever. Just from saving one wolf? From deciding one life mattered. From standing when standing cost everything. From learning that the things we're most afraid to face are often the things that set us free. Old Tom turned back to his grandson, saw in the boy's face the future of mountains that had survived everything time could throw at them. That's why our name means something here. Why people still remember. Not because we were perfect, but because when it mattered most, we stood. We fought. We protected what couldn't protect itself. "And the wolves?" Jacob asked. From the darkness outside came a sound, distant but unmistakable, a howl carrying through the night. Then another. Then a chorus of voices older than human memory, singing their claim to mountains that had always been theirs. "Listen," Old Tom said. "Shadow's children, still running free, still wild, still teaching us that some things are worth more than money, worth more than safety, worth everything we have to give." The howls continued, a symphony of survival, a reminder that wildness persisted, not because it was easy, but because people chose to protect it when protection cost everything. Jacob listened to the wolves, listened to his grandfather's breathing, listened to the mountain holding them both in patient stone embrace. And he understood, finally, completely, why his name carried weight in these hills, why legacy mattered, why some stories needed telling across generations. Because the mountain remembered, the wolves remembered, and as long as someone stood for what was wild and free and worth protecting, neither would ever truly die. 6 months passed like water over stone, slow, patient, inevitable. Spring transformed the Appalachian wilderness from white silence to green proclamation. The snow melted, revealing earth that had waited all winter to remember what growth felt like. Wildflowers carpeted the forest floor in colors that seemed impossible after months of monochrome. And through it all, Shadow's pups grew from helpless bundles of fur into young wolves, learning what it meant to be wild. Vera stood on her porch, watching them play in the clearing. The largest, a male she'd named Storm for his dark coat and fierce temperament, wrestled with his brother Ghost, whose pale fur made him nearly invisible against birch bark. The two females, Ember and Shadow Jr., practiced stalking techniques on an unfortunate rabbit that had wandered too close to their education. Shadow herself lay in a patch of sun, recovering her strength, watching her children with the patient intensity of a mother who knew the world wanted them dead, but refused to make it easy. "They're ready," Runs with Wolves said from behind Vera. He'd taken to appearing without sound, a habit that still startled her despite 6 months of practice. Ready for what? To leave, to find their own territory, to be what they were meant to be. Vera knew he was right. The pups were nearly grown now, strong, fast, capable. Keeping them here, even in kindness, was another form of cage. Where will they go? North, into federal wilderness, where land is protected and men cannot follow. Men followed there before, Vera said. Men will follow again. Perhaps, but today they are free. Tomorrow we protect them again, if we must. This is the way of things. He'd grown philosophical in the months since Harding's arrest. Or perhaps he'd always been philosophical, and she'd simply learned to hear it. The Apache warrior had become a permanent fixture in her life, teaching her things about the forest she'd never learned in 30 years of solitary living. In return, she'd taught him to read English, to navigate white society's peculiar rules, to survive in a world that wanted him on a reservation 1,000 miles from anything he loved. Tom appeared on the trail, moving with more confidence than the nervous young miner who'd first helped save a dying wolf. Federal protection of the wilderness had cost Harding's development plans their foundation. The mine had closed, but new opportunities had emerged. Tom now worked as a wilderness guide, leading hunters and photographers through country he'd learned to love instead of exploit. "Got word from town," he called as he climbed the porch steps. "Marshal Webster sent a telegram. Harding's trial is set for next month. They want you to testify." Vera's stomach tightened. 6 months had given her distance from that day. Distance from the fear and violence and terrible clarity that had driven her to finally stand for something. The thought of facing it again, of walking into a courtroom full of lawyers and judges and people who'd decide whether her word mattered, filled her with familiar dread. "I don't know if I can," she said quietly. "You faced 50 armed men," Tom pointed out. "A courtroom's nothing compared to that." 50 men I could shoot if they came at me wrong. Can't shoot lawyers." "Pity," Runs with Wolves observed, "would solve many problems." Despite herself, Vera smiled. The Apache's dry humor had become one of the unexpected gifts of their alliance. "There's more," Tom said. "Dr. Riley sent a letter. Says he's working with several wildlife organizations to create permanent protections for wolf habitat. He wants to use your documentation, your story, as the foundation. Says it could protect these mountains for generations." "My story," Vera repeated. The words felt strange. For 30 years, her story had been one of cowardice and abandonment. Now people wanted to use it as a foundation for protection. The irony wasn't lost on her. "And there's this," Tom said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "Came special delivery. From Charleston." Vera recognized the handwriting before she saw the name. Emma, her daughter. The woman she'd abandoned at 5 years old and never found courage to face. Her hands shook as she took the envelope. "I'll check on the pups," Tom said tactfully. He and Runs with Wolves moved away, giving her privacy for what came next. The letter was short, Emma's handwriting careful and controlled, each word chosen with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in her head. "Mother, Dr. Riley contacted me, told me what you did, what you've been doing for 6 months, the federal protection, the testimony, the fight to save something you believed in. I'm still angry. 30 years doesn't evaporate because you finally did one brave thing. But I'm also curious. Curious about the woman who could live alone for 3 decades and then suddenly stand against powerful men for the sake of wolves. I'm coming to visit. 2 weeks from today. I'll stay 1 night. We'll talk. I'm not promising forgiveness, but I'm willing to try understanding." Emma Vera read it 3 times. The words didn't change, but their weight shifted with each reading, from threat to possibility, from judgment to something that might, with effort and honesty, become reconciliation. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her shirt pocket, over her heart, where fear and hope tangled into something she didn't have words for yet. The 2 weeks passed like the 6 months before them, slow, heavy with anticipation. Vera cleaned the cabin with a thoroughness born of nervous energy. Runs with Wolves and Tom watched with amusement as she scrubbed floors that had gone years between cleanings, organized supplies that needed no organization, practiced conversations with empty air. "You are afraid of daughter more than you were afraid of 50 guns, Runs with Wolves observed. "Guns, I understand," Vera said. "Daughters are more complicated." In Apache culture, family is everything. To break family is to break spirit. You broke spirit 30 years ago. Now you try to mend. This is good. Hard, but good. What if she hates me? Then she hates you, but she comes anyway. Hate that brings someone to you is better than indifference that keeps them away. The wisdom in that settled over Vera like a blanket. Not comfortable, but warming nonetheless. Emma arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when spring rain had turned the mountain paths to mud and the sky to pearl. She rode in on horseback, having hired a guide from town who pointed her toward Vera's cabin and then tactfully retreated. Vera watched from the porch as her daughter dismounted. 35 years old, strong like her father had been, beautiful in the way of women who'd learned to carry their own weight. Her hair was darker than Vera remembered, pulled back in a practical bun. Her clothes spoke of city life, but her ease with the horse spoke of someone who hadn't forgotten mountain roots entirely. They stared at each other across 20 feet of muddy earth and 30 years of silence. Emma spoke first. "You look older." "I am older. 58 now. I barely remember what you looked like when I was 5. Sometimes I thought I'd made you up, a ghost mother who disappeared and never came back." The words landed like stones, heavy, unavoidable. "I'm sorry," Vera said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. For what specifically? For leaving? For staying gone? For missing every birthday, every milestone, every moment of my life? All of it, everything. I don't have excuses that matter. Only reasons that seemed important 30 years ago and feel like cowardice now. Emma tied her horse to the porch railing, climbed the steps, stood close enough that Vera could see her father's eyes looking out from her daughter's face. "Why did you leave?" "Your father died. I couldn't handle the pain. Couldn't face being a mother alone. Couldn't look at you without seeing everything I'd lost. So you chose running over staying. Chose hiding over facing your daughter who'd just lost her father and needed her mother more than ever." Yes. The simple acknowledgement seemed to surprise Emma, as if she'd expected justification or deflection. Getting brutal honesty instead required recalibration. "Do you know what it was like?" Emma asked. "Growing up knowing my mother chose mountains over me? Chose wolves and trees and solitude over her own child?" "No, I can imagine, but I can't know. That's one of the privileges of running. You don't have to live with what you leave behind." Emma's composure cracked slightly. Tears welled, but didn't fall. "I hated you for so long. Then I pitied you. Then I tried to forget you existed. None of it worked." "I'm sorry," Vera said again. Knowing it changed nothing, but needing to say it anyway. "Stop apologizing. I didn't come here for apologies. I came here to understand." She looked past Vera into the cabin, saw the simple life laid bare, the hand-built furniture, the supplies organized with military precision, the rifle by the door. The life of someone who'd stripped away everything except survival and had somehow, finally, found something worth living for again. "Show me," Emma said. "Show me what was worth more than me." It wasn't fair, wasn't rational, but Vera understood what her daughter needed. To see the mountains that had claimed her mother, to understand, even if she couldn't forgive. They walked in silence through forest still wet from rain. Vera showed her the trails she'd walked for 30 years, the streams where she'd fished, the clearings where deer came to graze at dawn, the life she'd built from grief and isolation and stubborn determination to keep breathing when breathing felt like the hardest thing in the world. Shadow appeared like smoke from the trees. The wolf stopped when she saw Emma, assessing threat levels with predator intelligence. The 4 pups emerged behind her, curious but cautious. Emma froze. "Those are the wolves. The ones you saved." "Shadow and her children, yes. They're magnificent." Shadow moved closer, testing Emma's scent on the wind. Finding nothing threatening, the wolf approached with the confidence of an animal who'd learned not all humans meant death. She stopped 5 feet from Emma and sat, yellow eyes unwavering. "She's deciding if you're pack or prey," Vera said. "Stay still. Let her choose." Emma stood motionless while a 90-pound predator made decisions about her worth. After a long moment, Shadow huffed once and moved away, her pups following. Not acceptance exactly, but not rejection either. "That's more than most people get," Vera said. "She's particular about who she trusts." "Smart animal." They walked farther, reached the ridge where Vera and the others had stood 6 months ago, watching 50 men hunt wolves like vermin. From this height, the valley spread below in layers of green and stone, ancient and patient, and utterly indifferent to human drama. "This is what you chose," Emma said, not quite a question. "This is where I ran, where I hid, where I convinced myself that isolation was better than risking more loss. And now? Now I know I was wrong. Running didn't protect me from pain. It just made me alone with it. And alone with pain, you become the pain. Nothing else." Emma sat on a boulder worn smooth by millennia of wind and rain. "Dr. Riley told me what you did, how you stood against those men, how you risked everything for wolves that most people would have just let die. I owed them. You owed me. Yes, I did. I do. And I can't pay that debt. Can't give you back your childhood or your mother when you needed her. But I can tell you I know I failed you. I can tell you I've thought about you every single day for 30 years. And I can tell you that if I could go back and make different choices, I would." Emma's tears fell now. Not many, but enough. "I want to hate you. It would be easier if I could just hate you." "You have every right." "But I can't. Because looking at you now, seeing this place, hearing how you finally found something worth fighting for, I see my father in you. The stubbornness, the conviction, the ability to stand alone against anything when you finally decide standing matters." She wiped her eyes roughly. "He would have been proud of what you did, protecting these wolves, standing up to corrupt men. That's who he was, who you were before he died." "And who I'm trying to be again," Vera said. 30 years too late for it to matter to you, but trying anyway." They sat in silence as the sun dropped toward the western peaks. The mountain held them both without judgment. Stone didn't care about human regrets. Trees didn't measure failures against intentions. The wild simply existed, and in existing, offered the possibility that people could do the same. "I'm not ready to call you mother," Emma said finally. "Maybe I never will be. I understand. But I'd like to know you, the woman you are now. Not the ghost I remember, or the absence I grew up with. The actual person sitting next to me." "I'd like that too." Emma stood. "I'm staying tonight. Tomorrow I go back to Charleston. But I'll write, and maybe I'll visit again. We'll see. That's more than I deserve. Probably, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. Because carrying hate for 30 years gets heavy. And I'm tired of being heavy." They walked back to the cabin as evening settled over the mountains. Runs with wolves had prepared food with the quiet competence he brought to everything. Tom had brought fresh bread from town. The four of them sat around Vera's small table, eating simply, talking occasionally, existing in the kind of peace that comes from having survived something together. Emma watched Runs with Wolves with undisguised curiosity. "You're Apache." "I am. Long way from home." "Home is where you stand for something. I stand here, now." She turned that over. "Dr. Riley said you were there too, when they confronted Harding's men. Said you fought to protect the wolves." "I fought to protect what cannot protect itself. Wolves. These mountains. My honor." "Your honor?" "In Apache belief, all living things have spirit. To destroy spirit without cause is to lose your own. I had lost enough, could not lose more." Emma looked between the Apache warrior, the young coal miner turned wilderness guide, and her mother, the hermit, who'd finally stopped hiding. "This is the strangest collection of people I've ever seen." "We're what happens when broken things decide to mend," Tom said. "Not perfect, not whole, but mending." That night, Emma slept in Vera's bed while Vera took the floor. They didn't talk much. The day had used up their words. But before Emma drifted off, she spoke into the darkness. "The wolves, will they be safe?" "As safe as we can make them. Federal protection helps, but vigilance helps more. We watch, we document, we stand ready to fight again if we must." "Good," Emma said. "Something should be protected in this world. Something should survive us." "Yes," Vera agreed. "Something should." Morning came soft and gray. Emma prepared to leave with promises to write, to visit again, to try. Not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of a path that might lead there eventually. As she mounted her horse, she looked down at Vera. "You asked what it was like growing up without you. I'll tell you. It was like missing something I couldn't name. Like having a hole where a person should be. But seeing you now, seeing what you fought for, I understand something." "What's that?" "That people are more than their worst choices. You made a terrible choice 30 years ago, but you made a different choice 6 months ago. Maybe there's room in the world for both truths." She rode away without looking back. Vera watched until the forest swallowed horse and rider both. "She is strong," Runs with Wolves observed. "Like Mother." "She's stronger than I ever was." "No, she carries what you gave her. Your stubbornness, your conviction, the ability to face hard things even when facing them hurts. You taught her that by leaving. Strange teaching, but teaching nonetheless." Vera turned that thought over like a stone in her hand. Smooth and solid and true, despite its roughness. The weeks that followed brought testimony and trials, and the slow grinding of justice against power. Vera stood in courtrooms and spoke truth to judges. Her photographs, Tom's documentation, Brennan's testimony, all combined into evidence that even Harding's expensive lawyers couldn't dismantle. The verdict came on a June morning. Guilty on all counts. 10 years in federal prison. Permanent prohibition from federal land acquisition. Fines that would consume his fortune, and then some. Marshal Webster found Vera outside the courthouse. "You did this," he said. "Your courage started everything else." "I just saved a wolf." "You saved more than that. Federal government is creating permanent wilderness protection for this entire region. No development, no mining, no hunting beyond sustainable limits. 300,000 acres preserved because you decided one life mattered. The numbers felt impossible. 300,000 acres. Generations of wolves and deer and elk and everything wild. Protected because she'd been too stubborn to let one dying animal go unmourned. "What happens to Brennan?" she asked. "Reduced sentence for testimony. 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. He asked about you, wanted to know if you'd forgive him." Nothing to forgive. He was doing his job until he decided his job was wrong. That took courage, too. That night, back in her cabin with Shadow and the pups, and mountains that held everything she'd learned about loss and stubborn hope, Vera sat down and wrote another letter. "Emma, you asked what was worth more than you. The truth is, nothing. Nothing was ever worth more than you. I didn't leave because these mountains mattered more. I left because I was broken and didn't know how to let you see my brokenness. But I'm learning now. Learning that showing weakness isn't shameful. That asking for help isn't failure. That choosing to fight for something, even when you're terrified, is how broken things begin to mend. I love you. I've always loved you. Even in my worst cowardice, even in my deepest hiding, I loved you. And I'm sorry it took me 30 years to be brave enough to say so. Your mother, Vera." She sealed the letter, gave it to Tom to mail. Didn't know if Emma would write back or throw it away unopened. But she'd said the words, finally, completely. And in saying them, she felt something shift inside her chest. Some ancient weight lifting. Some long-carried stone finally set down. Shadow appeared at her side. The wolf pressed her massive head against Vera's leg in the gesture that had become their language for trust, for pack, for belonging to something larger than yourself. "Thank you," Vera told the wolf, "for letting me save you, for saving me right back." Shadow's yellow eyes held hers. Between human and animal passed understanding that transcended species. The recognition that survival sometimes required help. That strength sometimes looked like accepting vulnerability. That the fiercest thing you could do was keep living when living felt impossible. The pups would leave soon, would find their own territories, their own packs, their own lives in a wilderness that had been saved because broken people decided mending mattered more than hiding. And Vera would stay, would watch over these mountains, would document the wolves, and stand ready to fight again when fighting became necessary. Would write to her daughter and hope for reconciliation while preparing for rejection. Would live, finally, instead of merely surviving. The mountain remembered all of it, every choice, every stand, every moment of courage carved from fear. Stone held it all without judgment, waiting patiently for the next person who needed to learn that what we choose to protect ends up protecting us right back. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, it protects everyone who comes after, too. 20 years moved through the mountain like roots through stone, silent, persistent, transforming everything they touched. Spring became summer, became autumn, became winter, the cycle repeating until seasons mattered less than the changes they carried. Old Tom Holloway paused in his story, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd carried a tale from beginning to middle and was approaching its end. The fire had burned down to coals again, casting the cabin in shades of amber and shadow. His grandson Jacob sat forward, elbows on knees, completely absorbed. "That was 1885, Jacob said. 20 years takes us to 1905. What happened in those 20 years?" Life happened, old Tom said. The kind that doesn't make for dramatic stories, but matters more than drama ever could. He stood slowly, moved to the window. Outside, the Appalachian night held the same patient darkness it had held for millennia. The same mountains, the same stars, the same wolves singing their ancient claim to wilderness. Vera and Emma never became close the way mothers and daughters should be, he continued. But they became something. Friends, maybe. Two women who shared blood and tried to share understanding, despite 3 decades of absence between them. Did Emma forgive her? Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a practice. Emma practiced, some days better than others. They wrote letters. Emma visited twice a year, brought her own children eventually. Let them know their grandmother who lived on the mountain with wolves. Jacob absorbed this. And the Apache? Runs with wolves? Old Tom smiled. He married a Cherokee woman, name of Mourning Dove. They had 4 children. Built a life on land the federal government finally recognized as belonging to native peoples. He died in 1923, 70 years old, surrounded by grandchildren. The marshals never came for him. Webster saw to that. And Tom, the young miner? That was my grandfather. He married a woman named Sarah. Not his mother, different Sarah. They had 6 children. Raised them to respect these mountains, to protect what needed protecting, to stand when standing cost everything. The old man turned from the window, but you're asking about the end of the story, about Vera, about what happened when 20 years of mending brought her to the edge of something new. He settled back into his chair. The fire crackled. Outside, the wolves sang. Let me tell you about 1905. The year Vera finally understood what it meant to be forgiven. Vera was 78 years old when the letter came. Her hands had developed the tremor that comes with age. Her eyesight had dimmed, and her joints protested cold mornings with increasing vigor. But her mind remained sharp, and her determination remained absolute. She lived alone still. Runs with wolves had moved to the Cherokee settlement after his marriage, though he visited often. Young Tom, now middle-aged Tom, had built his own cabin 5 miles south with Sarah and their growing family. The mountain had become less lonely without becoming crowded. Shadow had died 10 years prior. Old age, peaceful, surrounded by 3 generations of her descendants. Vera had buried her on the ridge where they'd first stood together against Harding's hunters, marking the grave with stones she'd carried up one at a time over the course of a week. But Shadow's children remained, and their children. The federal protection had held. Wolf populations had recovered from the edge of extinction to something approaching stability. Hikers now came to these mountains specifically hoping to hear wolves howl. The very thing Harding had tried to eliminate had become the region's greatest treasure. The letter arrived with the spring thaw. Emma's handwriting, familiar now after 20 years of correspondence. But the words inside carried weight that pulled Vera's breath short. Mother, I'm sick. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. Cancer. It started in my lungs and spread before we caught it. There's nothing to be done except wait and try to make peace with leaving. I'm writing because I need to tell you something I should have said 20 years ago when you first tried to rebuild what you'd broken. Something I was too angry and too hurt to say. I forgive you. I forgive you for leaving, for staying gone, for choosing grief over motherhood. I forgive you because I've lived long enough now to understand that people are complicated, and pain makes us do terrible things, and healing takes however long it takes. You gave me life. Then you gave me abandonment. Then, when I was 35 and angry and lost, You showed me what courage looked like. Imperfect courage. Late courage. But courage nonetheless. I'd like to see you, one last time. Not to say goodbye, because I'm not ready for goodbyes yet. But to sit with you, to let you know that the daughter you left behind became someone who could forgive. That's your legacy too, whether you meant it to be or not. I'll come when the roads are passable, probably late April. I'm bringing my daughter, your granddaughter. She deserves to know you before there's no you left to know. With love, I learned how to give, despite everything. Emma Vera read the letter 3 times. Then she sat on her porch and cried, with the kind of tears that come from wells so deep you didn't know they existed, until something finally broke through to them. Emma was dying. Her daughter, the child she'd abandoned, the woman she'd hurt more than any other living soul. And Emma had written to say she forgave. Forgiveness. The word felt like absolution and agony braided together. Relief that the debt might finally be acknowledged, and horror that it came with a 6-month deadline attached. Tom found her there hours later, letter clutched in shaking hands, eyes raw from crying. "Miss Vera, what's wrong?" She handed him the letter without words. He read it standing, his own eyes growing wet by the end. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so damn sorry." "She forgives me," Vera said. The words felt like stones in her mouth, heavy, valuable, impossible to swallow. "Isn't that what you wanted?" "I wanted her to have more time. Wanted to earn forgiveness through years of proving I'd changed. Not to have it handed to me while she's dying." Tom sat beside her on the porch steps, middle-aged now, graying at the temples, carrying his own weight of years and choices, but still the earnest young man who'd helped save a dying wolf because it felt like the right thing to do. "My father used to say we don't get to choose when grace arrives," Tom said. "Only whether we accept it when it comes." "I don't deserve grace." "No one does. That's what makes it grace." April came wet and wild, with storms that turned the mountain paths to rivers of mud. Vera prepared the cabin with the same nervous energy she'd shown 20 years before. Cleaned everything. Organized supplies. Practiced conversations that would never sound right, no matter how many times she rehearsed them. Runs with Wolves visited the week before Emma was due to arrive. He was 61 now, silver threading through his black hair, but he still moved with the fluid grace that had made Apache warriors legendary. "You are afraid," he observed. "Terrified. Good. Fear means you care. Only the dead feel nothing." He brought herbs from Cherokee tradition, remedies for pain that modern medicine couldn't touch. "For your daughter, when pain becomes too much, these will help." Will they cure her? No, but they will ease her journey. Sometimes that is all we can do, ease the journey. Morning Dove, his wife, had sent venison stew and fresh bread. "She says to tell you that mothers and daughters are complicated," Runs with Wolves said. "But love finds ways even when we cannot." Vera took the gifts with gratitude that transcended words. 20 years of friendship had taught them both that silence could communicate more than sentences. "What if I say the wrong thing?" Vera asked. "What if I hurt her again, even trying to help?" "Then you say wrong thing and hurt her, and you try again. This is how mending works, slowly, with setbacks, with patience that feels impossible but becomes necessary." "I don't know if I have that kind of patience." "You lived alone on mountain for 30 years. You have more patience than you know. You just never pointed it at forgiveness before. Emma arrived on an April afternoon when wildflowers had begun reclaiming the forest floor. She rode in a wagon driven by Tom, who'd met her in town because the journey would have been too hard for her to make alone. Even from a distance, Vera could see how illness had carved away everything except essence. Emma had become translucent, skin pale as birch bark, frame reduced to angles and bone. But her eyes still held her father's determination, her jaw still set with the stubbornness that ran through their family line like bedrock beneath soil. Beside her sat a girl of 15, dark hair, strong features, eyes that took in everything with the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. "Mother," Emma said, as Tom helped her from the wagon. "This is Rebecca, your granddaughter." The girl studied Vera with frank assessment. "You're shorter than I imagined." Despite everything, Vera almost smiled. "Sorry to disappoint." "I didn't say disappointed, just different than expected." They moved inside. Vera had prepared food, but Emma ate little. The cancer had stolen appetite, along with strength. But Rebecca ate with the unconscious hunger of youth, asking questions between bites. "Is it true you saved wolves? That you fought 50 men to protect them?" "It's more complicated than that." "How?" "We saved one wolf. The fight came later when powerful men decided that wolf didn't have the right to exist. We just made sure they couldn't kill her without someone witnessing." "But you could have died." "Yes." "Why risk it? For an animal?" Vera looked at Emma, who watched the exchange with quiet intensity, measuring how her mother would explain choices that had shaped all their lives. "Because everything we choose to protect ends up protecting us right back," Vera said. "I saved Shadow because I couldn't bear to watch another thing die when I had the ability to help. And in saving her, I learned how to stop running from everything I'd failed. Learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding something matters more than your fear." Rebecca considered this. "Did it matter more?" "The wolves did. And through saving them, I found my way back to your mother. Not all the way. Not perfectly. But enough to write letters. Enough to try. Mother says you left her when she was my age, 5 years old." The directness was startling. No dancing around pain, just stating it plainly. "I did." "Why?" Emma started to intervene, but Vera raised a hand. "No, she deserves truth." She turned back to Rebecca. "Because I was broken and didn't know how to let anyone see how broken I was. Because your grandfather died, and I couldn't handle being a mother alone. Because I was a coward who chose hiding over facing the hardest thing I'd ever experienced." "Do you regret it?" "Every day for 30 years. More than I have words to express." Rebecca absorbed this, then nodded as if filing information for future reference. "At least you're honest." After dinner, after Rebecca had fallen asleep in Vera's bed, the two women sat on the porch, watching stars emerge from twilight. The mountain held them both with patient indifference. Stone didn't care about human reconciliation, but it provided space for it nonetheless. "She's remarkable," Vera said. "Strong, direct, completely herself." "She's like you," Emma said, "which sometimes terrifies me and sometimes fills me with pride I don't entirely understand. How long do you have, really?" "Doctors say 6 months. I think less. I can feel it eating me from inside. Some days I wake up and I'm smaller than I was the day before, like I'm being erased, one piece at a time." Vera's hands tightened on her coffee cup. I'm sorry. Don't be. I've had a good life. Not the one I planned, not the one I wanted when I was 5 and my mother disappeared, but good nonetheless. I married a kind man, raised a fierce daughter, did work that mattered. That's more than many people get. You deserved more. We all deserve more. We get what we get and make meaning from it. They sat in silence as darkness deepened. An owl called from the forest. Something small died in its talons. The ancient mathematics of predator and prey continued without pause for human sentiment. I meant what I wrote, Emma said finally. I forgive you. You don't have to. I know, that's what makes it forgiveness instead of obligation. Vera felt tears threatening again, pushed them back. I don't know how to accept that. Don't know how to hold forgiveness when I spent 30 years holding guilt. The same way you held that dying wolf 20 years ago, carefully, with both hands, knowing it might not survive, but trying anyway. The comparison landed with unexpected weight. Vera looked at her daughter, really looked, saw the woman who'd grown from the child she'd abandoned, saw strength and wisdom and scars that had healed crooked, but healed nonetheless. I love you, Vera said. The words felt rusty, unused, but true. I've always loved you, even when I couldn't show it, even when I ran. The love never stopped. I know, Emma said. That's the hardest part. If you'd stopped loving me, I could have hated you cleanly. But knowing you loved me, and left anyway, made it complicated, made it hurt worse. I'm sorry. I know that too. Emma reached across the space between them, took Vera's weathered hand in her own diminished one. But I'm here now, and you're here, and we have whatever time remains. Let's not waste it on apologies we've already spoken. They sat holding hands as night deepened into true darkness, as the temperature dropped and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, as the mountain held them both and asked nothing except that they be present to whatever came next. The week that followed was gift-wrapped in borrowed time. Emma slept late and tired early, her strength measured in hours rather than days. But when she was awake, they talked, really talked, about Daniel, Emma's father, about the life they'd planned before the mine collapsed, about the 30 years of silence and the 20 years of tentative rebuilding. Rebecca explored the mountain with the fearlessness of youth. Vera taught her to track deer, to identify edible plants, to move through the forest with respect rather than dominance. The girl absorbed everything with hunger that reminded Vera of herself before grief had taught her to stop hungering. She's going to be formidable, Vera told Emma one afternoon while Rebecca was off exploring. She already is. Sometimes I think she's raising me instead of the other way around. The fierce ones often do, Emma smiled. Were you fierce at 15? I thought I was. Really, I was just stubborn. Fierce came later, after I'd lost everything and had to decide whether to die or keep living. What made you choose living? Vera thought about that. A dying wolf who refused to give up, who fought for her pups even when fighting seemed pointless. She taught me that persistence is its own form of courage. Shadow. Yes, shadow. Emma's breathing had become labored. The cancer was pressing on her lungs now. Every breath a negotiation with failing tissue. But she pushed through the discomfort to speak. I want to see where you buried her, before I can't walk anymore. They made the journey the next morning, slow, with many rests. Rebecca on one side of Emma, Vera on the other, supporting her between them. The ridge where Shadow was buried stood high enough to see valleys spreading in every direction, green and ancient, protected now, wild. The stone cairn Vera had built remained intact. Moss had grown over some rocks. Weather had shifted others, but the shape held. A monument to the wolf who'd saved a woman who'd saved her right back. Emma knelt with difficulty, placed her hand on the stones. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for teaching my mother how to fight again." She looked up at Vera. "When I die, I want to be buried here too, next to Shadow. Is that strange?" "No," Vera said. "It makes perfect sense. Will you do it? Build me a cairn like this, so I'm part of the mountain?" "Yes." "Promise?" "I promise." They sat together on the ridge, 3 generations of women, bound by blood and choice, and the strange mathematics of forgiveness. Rebecca asked questions about wolves. Emma answered what she could. Vera filled in the rest. And between them, they wove a story that none of them would see finished, but all of them were part of. Emma died 6 weeks later, not on the mountain, but in her home in Charleston. Rebecca sent word via telegraph. Vera made the journey down for the first time in 20 years. The funeral was small. Emma's husband, Rebecca, a few friends, and Vera, standing at the back like a stranger who'd wandered into someone else's grief. But afterward, Rebecca approached her. "Mother wanted me to give you this." It was a letter. Emma's handwriting, even shakier than usual, written in the final days when strength was a currency she could barely afford. "Mother, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope it was peaceful. I hope Rebecca was with me. I hope I managed to die with the same stubborn determination I inherited from you. I want you to know that forgiving you was the best thing I ever did. Not because it made the past hurt less, but because it freed me from carrying anger into whatever comes next. You taught me this without meaning to. You showed me that people can be broken for decades and still learn to stand. That cowardice can transform into courage. That the worst thing you ever did doesn't have to be the last thing you do. Take care of Rebecca, not as a replacement for the daughter you lost, but as the granddaughter you gained. She needs your fierceness, your stubbornness, your ability to survive when survival seems impossible. And take care of the wolves. Keep watching. Keep fighting. Keep standing when standing costs everything. You were a terrible mother for 30 years, but you became something else in the 20 after. Not perfect, not whole, but mending. That's enough. That's more than enough." With love earned through both our efforts, Emma Vera folded the letter carefully, tucked it into her shirt pocket, over her heart, where Emma's forgiveness would rest for whatever years remained. "She wanted to be buried on the mountain," Rebecca said, "next to the wolf. Will you help me?" "Yes." They brought Emma's ashes back in an urn carved with wolves running through forests, climbed the ridge together, built a cairn beside Shadow's, marked it with stones carried up one at a time, each rock a prayer for the dead and a promise to the living. When it was finished, when the last stone was placed, Rebecca spoke. "She forgave you. I want you to know that I understand why she did, and I'm glad she did. Thank you. But I also want you to know that I'm angry that you left her, that you missed so much, that you caused pain that lasted decades." "You have every right. I know I do. But I'm telling you anyway, because honesty matters. Because pretending I'm not angry would dishonor what you and Mother built together." Vera nodded. "Your anger is fair and earned, and I won't ask you to give it up." "Good, because I might hold it for years or forever. Or I might wake up one day and decide to let it go. I don't know yet." "Whatever you decide, I'll accept." Rebecca looked at her grandmother, really looked. seeing the 78 years etched in weathered skin, the hands that had built this cairn and saved dying wolves and written letters to a daughter who had every reason to never respond. "Will you teach me," Rebecca asked, "about the wolves, about the mountain, about how to fight for things, even when you're terrified?" "Yes." "Then I'll visit, not because I forgive you, but because learning matters more than holding grudges." They stayed on the ridge until sunset painted the valleys in shades of amber and gold, until the first wolves began their evening songs, until the mountain reminded them both that some things transcended human pain and human forgiveness, and human attempts to make meaning from chaos. Old Tom's voice returned, pulling Jacob back to the present. The fire had burned down to embers. Dawn was approaching beyond the windows. "Rebecca visited Vera for 10 years, he said, learned everything the old woman could teach. When Vera died at 88, Rebecca was the one who built her cairn, right next to Emma and Shadow. 3 graves on a ridge overlooking protected wilderness. And the wolves? Still running free, still protected. Rebecca became a wildlife biologist, dedicated her life to continuing what her grandmother started. Her children did the same. That's why these mountains are still wild, because one woman saved one wolf, and that choice rippled forward through generations." Jacob sat back, processing everything. So the story isn't about the wolves at all.
It's about both. The wolves and the people who chose to protect them. About how broken things can mend if given time and effort and grace we don't deserve but receive anyway. What's the lesson? Old Tom smiled. That what we choose to protect ends up protecting us right back. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something matters more than fear. That forgiveness is possible even after decades of pain. And that the smallest acts of mercy can echo through generations. Outside, wolves howled. Inside, a young man understood something about legacy and responsibility, and the weight of family names that meant something in mountains that remembered everything. "Will you teach me," Jacob asked, "about protecting this place?" "Yes," Old Tom said. "The way Vera taught Rebecca. The way Rebecca taught her children. The way we teach each new generation that some things are worth fighting for, worth standing for, worth whatever it costs." The mountain heard. The wolves heard. And somewhere in the space between stone and spirit, 3 women rested beside a wolf who'd saved them all in ways none of them expected. The story was finished, but the protecting never ended, and that was exactly how it should be. The first light of dawn crept through the cabin windows, turning darkness to pearl gray. Old Tom Holloway sat in silence, letting the weight of the story settle like snow on winter branches. His grandson Jacob had gone quiet too, processing everything he'd heard through the long night. Outside, the wolf songs had faded. Morning birds began their chorus. The mountain prepared for another day of patient existence. "There's one more thing," Old Tom said finally. "Something I haven't told you yet. The reason I needed you to hear this story tonight, of all nights." Jacob looked up, curiosity sparking through his exhaustion. "Tomorrow morning, developers are coming. Different company, different men, but the same old story. They want to build luxury cabins on the ridge where Vera and Emma and Shadow are buried. Say they have permits, say they have rights, say progress can't be stopped forever." The words landed heavy. Jacob's face shifted from curiosity to anger. "They can't do that. That land is protected." protected by laws written by men who can be convinced to rewrite them, protected by federal agencies that change priorities with elections, protected by nothing except people willing to stand for it when standing costs everything. Old Tom stood slowly, joints protesting 90 years of mountain living. He moved to the window, looked out at ridges still dark against the lightening sky. "I'm too old to fight them," he said quietly. "My fighting days are done, but yours are just beginning." Jacob stood too, 16 years old, strong, uncertain, standing at the threshold of choices that would define what kind of man he'd become. "What do you want me to do?" What Vera did, what Runs with Wolves did, what every generation of our family has done since 1885. Stand, document. Make sure anyone who tries to destroy this place knows someone is watching, someone who won't let it happen quietly. One person against a development company? That's impossible. One woman against 50 armed men was impossible too. But she did it anyway. Not alone. She found allies, found people who believed the same things were worth protecting. You'll do the same. Jacob moved to stand beside his grandfather at the window. Together they watched darkness surrender to light. The eternal negotiation between night and day. The mountain witnessing it all without judgment. "Tell me the rest," Jacob said. "You said there was one more thing." Old Tom smiled. "Smart boy. Yes, one more thing. The reason this story matters more than just history." He returned to his chair, settled in with the deliberate care of someone marshaling limited strength for important words. In 1924, Rebecca came to this cabin. She was 19 years old, studying biology at university. Brilliant, fierce, everything her grandmother had been before grief tried to destroy her. The old man's eyes grew distant, looking not at the present cabin, but at memories layered over it like transparent pages. "I was 22, working as a wilderness guide like my grandfather before me. We met when she came to study wolf populations, spent 3 months tracking packs, documenting behaviors, falling in love without meaning to." Jacob's eyes widened. "You married her? You married Rebecca?" "I did, in 1925. Vera performed the ceremony. Unofficial, but it didn't matter. The mountain was our witness. That was enough." He pulled a photograph from his shirt pocket, faded, creased from decades of carrying. It showed a young woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, standing beside a young man who looked like a younger version of old Tom himself. Behind them, an elderly woman with weathered features and a wolf sitting calmly at her feet. "That's Vera at 89, old Tom said. 1 month before she died. That's Shadow Jr. at her side. 3rd generation descended from the wolf she saved. And that's Rebecca, your great-grandmother." The words rearranged everything Jacob thought he knew about his family, about himself. "So the woman in the story, Emma's daughter, she's my great-grandmother?" "Yes, which makes Vera your great-great-grandmother. And every drop of stubbornness in your blood, every bit of determination that makes you question authority and fight for what's right, comes from her. From a woman who spent 30 years broken and then chose to mend." Jacob stared at the photograph, at faces that carried genes he'd inherited, at a wolf that proved some things persisted across generations. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because stories need the right time, and tonight was the right time. Those developers come tomorrow. You needed to know what you're made of before you face them." Old Tom tucked the photograph back into his pocket, over his heart, where he'd carried it for 65 years. Rebecca died in 1989, he continued. She was 84, spent her whole life protecting these mountains, wrote the legislation that created permanent federal wilderness protection, fought developers and politicians, and anyone who thought money gave them the right to destroy wildness. His voice cracked slightly. She was the strongest person I've ever known, and she died knowing the fight wasn't finished, that every generation would have to stand again, defend again, prove again that some things matter more than profit. What did she tell you before she died? She said, "Tom, the mountain will remember who stood for it. Make sure our grandchildren know they come from people who stood. So I'm telling you, you come from people who stood." From Vera and Emma and Rebecca, from Apache warriors and coal miners and mountain women who refused to surrender to fear. Jacob sat down slowly, processing the weight of legacy. And now it's my turn. Now it's your turn. They sat in silence as full morning arrived. Sunlight touched the peaks, turning snow-covered ridges to gold. Somewhere in the protected wilderness, wolves moved through their territories, descendants of shadow, living proof that standing worked. "Tell me what to do," Jacob said finally. Old Tom smiled. "You already know. You've been listening all night. Document everything. Find allies. Stand publicly. Don't let them work in silence." Yes, and one more thing Rebecca taught me. When facing powerful people who think money makes them right, don't fight their fight. Change the battlefield. What does that mean? Developers want this to be about permits and property rights, legal battles they can win with expensive lawyers. You make it about something else, about legacy, about what kind of people we are, about whether we're the generation that protected the mountain or the generation that sold it. He pulled out his phone. The juxtaposition of ancient wisdom and modern technology almost made Jacob smile. "This is your weapon," old Tom said. "Not rifles, not lawyers. This. Document what they do. Show people. Let the whole world watch. Make it impossible for them to destroy quietly. They'll still have permits. Permits can be revoked when enough people care. Laws can be changed when enough voices demand it. But first, people have to care. Your job is making them care." "How?" "Tell them what I told you. Not all of it, not the whole long story, but the heart of it. That this ridge holds graves of women who fought to protect it. That wolves run free here because someone chose mercy over fear. That some places are sacred not because gods decreed it, but because people bled for it." Old Tom stood again, moved to a chest in the corner, opened it with a key he kept on a chain around his neck. Inside were documents, photographs, maps, decades of documentation about the mountain and its protectors. "This is everything," he said. Vera's original field notes from her wildlife biology days, Rebecca's research, photographs of every wolf pack for the last 100 years, proof that protection works, proof that standing matters. He handed the chest to Jacob. "Use it, all of it. Make them see what they're trying to destroy." Jacob accepted the chest with reverence. It was heavy, not just with paper and photographs, but with responsibility, with the accumulated weight of generations who'd chosen to fight instead of flee. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail, but you fail trying. That's the only failure Vera would have understood, the only one Rebecca would have forgiven. Not trying is the only real defeat." The old man's eyes glistened. "I won't be here to see how this ends. I'm 90 years old, My heart is tired. But you'll be here. You'll see whether our family's legacy continues or ends with my generation. Don't talk like that. I'm not being morbid, just realistic. Everyone dies, Jacob. The question is what we leave behind. I'm leaving you this story, this chest, this responsibility. What you do with it determines whether everything Vera and Rebecca fought for meant anything. Jacob felt tears threatening. Push them back. I won't let you down. You can't let me down. I'll be dead. Old Tom smiled to soften the words. But you might let yourself down. Might let the mountain down. Might let all those wolves running free down. Don't do that. Be worthy of the blood you carry. They spent the rest of the morning going through the chest. Old Tom explaining each document, each photograph, each piece of evidence that the mountain was worth protecting. Teaching his grandson how to fight battles with truth instead of violence. By noon, Jacob understood. Not everything. You couldn't learn a century of resistance in one morning, but enough to start. The developers arrived at 2 o'clock. 3 men in expensive SUVs. Surveyors with equipment that cost more than most people's houses. They parked at the base of the ridge and began unloading gear. Jacob was waiting for them, phone recording, standing on the exact spot where Vera's cairn marked sacred ground. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The lead developer, a man in his 40s with the confident smile of someone used to getting his way, approached. "We're surveying for a development project, luxury cabins, high-end mountain retreat. You'll need to move." "I don't think so." "Son, we have permits. This is all legal. You're trespassing on land designated for private development. This is federal wilderness, protected since 1906, and I'm standing on my great-great-grandmother's grave. So unless you want to build your luxury cabins on top of a cemetery, I suggest you reconsider." The developer's smile faltered. "There's no cemetery here, no official records." Because she didn't want official records. She wanted mountain stone and wild land. But I have documentation, photographs going back 100 years, proof that this ridge has been a burial site for 5 generations of my family. Jacob pulled out his phone, started showing pictures. Vera's cairn, Emma's, Rebecca's. Wolves running through the same territory across decades. An unbroken line of protection from 1885 to the present. I'm also live streaming this conversation to 5,000 people who follow my environmental activism account. So everything you say, everything you do, is being watched. How do you want to proceed? The developer looked at his colleagues, at the phone, at the determined teenager standing on stones that had witnessed a century of resistance. "We'll be back," he said, "with lawyers. Bring them. I'll bring mine too, and journalists, and every environmental group in 3 states, and we'll see whose story people believe. The corporation trying to build on graves, or the family protecting its ancestors." The men left. Jacob kept recording until their vehicles disappeared down the mountain road. Then he lowered his phone and allowed himself to shake. Old Tom had been watching from the cabin porch. Now he walked slowly toward his grandson, each step deliberate and proud. "You did good." I was terrified. Vera was terrified too, every time. Terror doesn't disqualify courage. It proves it. They stood together on the ridge, 5 cairns now. Vera, Emma, Rebecca, and 2 others Jacob hadn't asked about yet. "Who else is buried here?" he asked. "Runs with wolves." He asked to rest near the mountain woman who'd trusted him when no one else would. And Mourning Dove, his wife. She said where her husband rested, She wanted to rest too. 5 graves. 5 people who'd chosen this mountain over safety, over comfort, over everything except the conviction that some things mattered more than individual survival. "They're all watching," old Tom said quietly. "Every person who stood for this place, watching to see if we're worthy of what they left us." "No pressure." The old man laughed, real laughter that cracked through solemnity like spring breaking winter. "All the pressure, all of it. That's what legacy means. The pressure to be worthy of those who came before." They walked back to the cabin as afternoon sun painted the valleys in shades of green and gold. Inside, old Tom moved with the careful deliberation of someone rationing limited energy. "I need to rest," he said. "Old bones, old heart. But you keep working. Call those environmental groups. Call journalists. Make noise. Make sure this doesn't happen quietly." Jacob spent the afternoon doing exactly that. Emails, phone calls, social media posts, building the kind of attention that made quiet destruction impossible. By evening, 3 news outlets had contacted him. 5 environmental organizations had offered support. And his live stream had been viewed 40,000 times. The mountain was being watched. That was the first step toward being protected. Old Tom woke for dinner, ate little, but seemed satisfied by Jacob's report of the day's work. "You're a natural at this," he said. "Rebecca would have loved you, would have seen herself in your stubbornness. Tell me more about her, about your life together." So old Tom did. Told stories of 64 years of marriage, of children raised to respect wild things, of grandchildren who learned to track wolves before they learned to read, of a love built on shared conviction that some fights were worth having, even when winning seemed impossible. "She made me better," he said simply. "Made me braver. Made me understand that comfort isn't the same as happiness. That the best life is one spent fighting for things that matter." Do you miss her? Every day, every hour. But I'm grateful too. Grateful I had her. Grateful she chose me. Grateful we built something together that outlasted both of us. He looked at Jacob with eyes that held 90 years of living. "That's what I want for you. Not necessarily marriage, not necessarily fighting developers, but purpose. Something you believe in enough to spend your life protecting it." The mountain? The mountain. The wolves. The memory of people who stood when standing cost everything. Whatever calls to you, whatever makes you willing to be uncomfortable in service of something larger. They sat in silence as darkness returned, the cycle completing, night to day to night again. The mountain turning through seasons, while humans struggled with their small urgencies. "I'm tired," old Tom said finally. "Really tired. Think I'll sleep now. Want help getting to bed?" "No, I'll sit here a while. Watch the fire. Think about Rebecca and Vera and all the stubborn women who shaped this family." Jacob hesitated. Something in his grandfather's tone felt final. "You okay?" "I'm 90 years old. Okay is relative. But yes, I'm at peace. That's better than okay." "I love you, Grandpa." "I love you too, boy. You're going to do great things. You're going to make them all proud. Vera, Rebecca, every person who stood on that ridge and refused to surrender." Jacob went to bed but couldn't sleep. Around midnight he rose and found old Tom still sitting in his chair, still watching the fire, but not moving, not breathing. His grandfather had died the way he'd lived, quietly, with dignity, surrounded by mountains he'd spent a lifetime protecting. On his lap was the photograph, Vera and Rebecca and Shadow Jr. His hand rested on it gently, the last thing he'd looked at before his heart decided it had beaten enough. Jacob called the authorities, made arrangements, did everything that death requires of the living. But through it all, he felt a strange certainty settling over him. Old Tom hadn't just died. He'd passed something forward. Had spent his last night telling stories specifically so Jacob would understand what he was inheriting. Had orchestrated his own ending to coincide with the moment his grandson needed it most. The funeral was small. Family, friends, people who'd known Tom Holloway as a man who stood for the mountain when standing mattered. They buried him on the ridge with the others. 6 cairns now. 6 people who'd chosen the same hills, the same fights, the same stubborn determination that profit didn't justify destruction. After everyone left, Jacob stood alone among the graves. Late afternoon sun painted everything in amber and shadow. Wolves began their evening songs, the sound that had echoed through these valleys for generations. The sound Vera had fought to preserve. The sound Rebecca had studied. The sound old Tom had loved. "I'll keep standing," Jacob said to the stones, to the mountain, to everyone who'd stood before him. "I'll fight them. I'll protect this place. I'll be worthy of you." The mountain didn't answer. Stone never did. But the wolves sang louder, and in their voices Jacob heard affirmation, heard welcome, heard the ancient acknowledgement that he'd joined something larger than himself. The developers came back 2 weeks later, with lawyers, with revised permits, with confidence that money and legal expertise would overcome teenage resistance. Jacob was ready. He'd spent those 2 weeks building coalition, environmental groups, Native American advocacy organizations, descendants of coal miners who'd fought Harding in 1885, journalists who understood that some stories resonated beyond their immediate facts. When the developers arrived, they found not one teenager, but 200 people, standing on the ridge, silent, determined, each one holding a photograph of the mountain at different times across the last century, proving it had been protected, proving protection had worked, proving some legacies deserved continuation. The lead developer looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at the weight of accumulated resistance. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Jacob agreed. "It's never over. Every generation has to stand again. That's what makes it sacred. Not that it's easy, that it requires constant defending." The developers left. Their permits were eventually revoked after public pressure made approval politically impossible. The ridge remained protected. The wolves kept singing. And Jacob learned what old Tom had tried to teach him. That legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to carry forward. It's the decision that some fights matter enough to spend your life having them. It's understanding that comfort isn't the same as purpose, and that the best life is one spent standing for something larger than yourself. Years later, when Jacob had children of his own, he brought them to the ridge, showed them the 7 cairns now: Vera, Emma, Rebecca, Runs with Wolves, Mourning Dove, Old Tom, and one more added recently, Sarah, Jacob's wife, a biologist who'd spent her life studying wolf populations, who'd chosen to rest near the woman who'd started it all. "Tell us the story," his daughter asked, 10 years old, fierce, already showing signs of the stubbornness that ran through their family line like bedrock. So Jacob told her about a woman who lived alone for 30 years, about a wolf who refused to die, about an Apache warrior and a coal miner and a community that stood together, about his great-great-grandmother and great-grandmother and grandfather, about everyone who'd chosen the mountain over comfort.
"And now it's your turn," he said when the story finished. "Someday developers will come again. Someday someone will try to destroy this place, and you'll have to decide, do you stand or do you let it go?" His daughter looked at the cairns, at the protected wilderness spreading in every direction, at the legacy built stone by stone across generations. "I'll stand," she said, simply, certainly. The way Vera had said it, the way they'd all said it when their moment came. "Good," Jacob said. "That's all any of us can do. Stand when standing costs everything. Protect what can't protect itself. Remember that what we choose to defend ends up defending us right back." The wolves sang as the sun set. The mountain held them all. And the story continued generation after generation, each one choosing whether to carry forward what they'd been given or let it die with them. The mountain remembered everything, every stand, every fight, every person who'd chosen stubbornness over surrender. And as long as someone kept standing, the mountain would keep remembering, the wolves would keep singing, and the legacy would persist, imperfect and ongoing, requiring constant effort, but offering something money could never buy: purpose, meaning, the knowledge that you stood for something when standing mattered most. That was Vera's gift, passed through Emma to Rebecca, to old Tom, to Jacob, to his children and beyond. A gift that cost everything and gave back more. The gift of knowing what you're willing to fight for and fighting for it, even when you're terrified, even when winning seems impossible, even when comfort whispers that surrender would be easier, because some things are worth more than easy. Some legacies are worth more than comfort, and some mountains remember who stood for them when it mattered most. This mountain remembered, and it always would.